Are you carrying heavy tripod for nothing? Or missing sharp photos by trusting your camera's stabilization? In this video, I'll show you exactly when to use each so you stop wasting effort and start getting sharper photos every time. And in a minute, I'll show you how the stabilization inside your camera and your lens actually works. Many of us trust stabilization too much and end up with blurry photographs. Others ignore it completely and carry a heavy tripod unnecessarily. The truth is, stabilization has its limits. I have tested this in fashion and in wildlife photography. From horses in motion to 800mm lens in the Himalayas. And I can tell you, stabilization can be a lifesaver. But it can also fall when you need it most. That's why in this video, we're going to compare stabilization and tripod side by side. So you'll know exactly how to trust one, when to use both, and how to get sharp results all the time. Alright guys, how stabilization works. There are two kinds of stabilizations, but let's talk about the lens stabilization first. Inside the lens, there's a small floating group of glass elements. When your hand shakes, the sensors detect it. And that glass group, it moves in the opposite direction to compensate for the shakes. This keeps the light path straight so the image hitting the sensor stays sharp instead of wobbly. But the lens isn't the only place stabilization helps. Let's look at the second system inside your camera's body. Some cameras take a different approach. Instead of moving glass, the sensor itself is floating on a movable platform. Gyros inside the camera detect the smallest shakes and the sensor shifts in the exact opposite direction. Just like your lens, but in the lens, it happens in the glass. In the camera, it happens on the floating sensor itself. This means any lens, even the old manual lens, can benefit from the stabilization of the sensor in your camera. And in some cameras, both the systems work together, meaning the lens and the sensor. The lens handles the big shakes, the pitch and the yaw when you tilt or pan. The camera sensor then cleans up the finer movements, like the roll and the micro shifts. Together, they give you the maximum stability possible. Alright guys, before we can start using all this information about the lens stabilization and the camera stabilization, let's look into tripod stabilization. And one of the biggest debates in photography. Should you turn stabilization off when your camera is on a tripod? The old advice is yes, but that made sense years ago because early stabilization systems weren't that smart. They would actually hunt for movement that weren't there. And in that process, the lens or the sensor would shift slightly, resulting in soft images. But modern cameras and lenses are much smarter. The minute you put it on a tripod, they will sense it and shut down the stabilization mode or slow it down. And that's why my approach is very simple. I keep stabilization on all the time. If the tripod is perfectly steady and the environment doesn't have too many shakes, the system will usually back off in any case. But if there is wind or footsteps or shakes, or a little vibration, the stabilization will take effect and make it work for me. And here is something that most of us forget. When your camera is on a tripod and you're panning or tilting, you are moving the camera, so it does have that micro jitters in any case, like panning with a bird in flight or tracking a running horse. There will always be micro shakes, no matter how steady your tripod is. In this case, the stabilization becomes essential because it smoothens out those tiny vibrations while you are moving. And that brings up another question. What if the platform itself is moving? like when you are in a car or a boat, shooting on a moving platform. A tripod in that situation just transfers the biggest movements, the biggest vibrations directly to the camera, sensor, or the lens. For me, it works best if it is handheld in these two situations, in a car or in a boat. And what happens is I use my shoulders, my elbows, my hands to stabilize the movement of the car. You see, I'm doing this, like I suck in my stomach and I use my shoulders to move, to absorb all that vibration that's coming from the car or from a moving boat, so to speak. Instead of being fixed, and then where is the vibration going? The vibration is going straight on top, on my camera or on the lens. Yes, there are gimbals and so on and so forth, but I think this is the best gimbal you have, especially when you are in a moving platform yourself. I can absorb most of that motion, and the stabilization system can take care of the tiny tremors. I have tested this while photographing this, and while photographing this, and while photographing this. In all these cases, hand-holding gave me the sharp, clear result. And I know the tripod would not be able to do that. If you're photographing something that's moving, trust your body and the stabilization. It usually beats locking your camera or your lens on a tripod. I don't use a tripod when I'm on a moving car or a boat. Now that we've covered that, let's talk about lens stabilization modes and which one you should choose for sharp results. Alright guys, all this information is great to know, but now let's talk about the stabilization modes, which is going to make it even better and you will get sharper photographs. Choosing the right stabilization mode. One more way to get the most out of your lens stabilization is to understand the right modes on your lens. Most pro telephoto lens, Canon IS, Nikon's VR, or Sony's OSS super telephoto lenses normally give you guys three options. Option number one is for general stabilization, or you may say mode number one. It corrects shakes in all directions, both tilt, up and down, and pan, side to side. There's another mode, let's call it mode number two, is for panning. This turns off horizontal corrections, so you can follow a subject smoothly from side to side, while the lens will still correct vertical shakes. The third one, or if you want to call it mode number three, is for unpredictable action. It activates stabilization only on the moment of exposure. Every lens manufacturer labels their modes differently. Refer to your lens manufacturer's manual to know exactly which mode to use when. But remember, stabilization has its limits, especially when it comes to subject in motion. Let's break that down. One thing you need to remember, stabilization only fixes your movements, not the subject's movements. If a horse is galloping or the bird is flying, stabilization is not going to freeze their movements. For that, shutter speed is still king. So here's my rule of thumb. If the subject moves, shutter speed controls sharpness. If only I move or you move, then stabilization helps that. It's a simple way to know what matters most in the movement. Okay, so what should you use? Tripod or stabilization? Here's the truth. In today's world, it's not tripod over stabilization. The best results come from knowing when to use one over the other, or use both together. If I'm tracking a subject like birds in flight or a horse running, I almost use both. A tripod for support and stabilization turned on to smooth the micro jitters. If my subject is steady, I tend to lean on a tripod. That gives me rock solid sharpness, especially with heavy lens or long exposures. But if the subject's movement is unpredictable and wild, it's usually done handheld with stabilization. That gives me freedom to move fast, while the technology handles the small shakes and the murmurs. The only time I skip a tripod is when I am on a moving platform like the boat or the car. In those cases, handheld for me works the best because my arms and body can absorb the big shakes and stabilization clears up the rest. So don't think of it as tripod versus stabilization. Think of them as tools that work together. The key is in learning to use which one in which situation. And finally, let's look at how you can use stabilization creatively, not just to fix camera shakes. Okay, let's go through the creative use of stabilization. Stabilization isn't just about saving sharpness. It can also expand into creativity. You can use it for handheld long exposures. Think waterfalls or moving flocks where you couldn't normally hold the camera steady. It's amazing for low light when you want to avoid the tripod but still want sharp images. And it really shines in tight locations. Places where it's impossible to use the tripod, but you still want a good, steady, sharp result. Once you understand how stabilization works, it opens up such a vast way of taking different kind of photographs. Okay guys, we have learned how stabilization works, when stabilization can work, stabilization alongside tripod, when is the best situation to use it. Now, go out there, practice, and if you guys want to learn about zebras, this is the video that you should go and watch. I will speak to you guys soon. Thank you.